Allison.
Thank you. I'm going to tell you about the challenges of developing a food system for spaceflight, and I'm going to start with how we dealt with those historical challenges with the Gemini and Mercury missions, and then how we deal with those challenges moving into long-duration spaceflight and looking at a Mars mission. So you can play the video. So, as you can see with these crew members, it's a lot of fun when your food floats around in microgravity, but it's kind of hard to eat. So, we had to think about how would they eat in space. So how do we package the food so that they can easily eat it without it floating around? And we can't have a lot of crumbs because the crumbs will get into their nose and their eyes and also into the equipment. So we have to package foods and put things like Velcro on them to keep them in place. And we also have magnetic silverware. Now, one of the things we have to think about is we don't have refrigerators and freezers. So the food has to be safe for the length of the mission without having any way to preserve it except the packaging and the way we process it. And I think the video got stuck. But basically, one of the most important things we have to remember is food is psychologically important. So these crew members go into spaceflight, and it's one of the only familiar things they have. And food's central to our lives. It's important to our gatherings and our celebrations. So they want a familiar food system. So we have to package these foods and make them safe to eat without refrigerators and freezers and microgravity, and make these foods familiar and foods that they want to eat. So for the Mercury and Gemini missions, the scientists dealt with this by making tubed and cubed foods. So it's almost like the closest thing that we'd get to a pill. We're never going to send a pill. It's just not acceptable. Food's too important. But the first crew members would just eat these foods directly out of the tube, and these foods were heated to make them safe, so like canned food. But they were liquid, and they had little cubes that were packaged so that they could just pop them in their mouths. But they didn't like these foods very much. And we added some freeze-dried foods where the moisture was removed on Earth, and then it could be added back in spaceflight for the Gemini missions, and it was added back with a water gun. So they just guessed the amount of water they were adding back. And they would squeeze these foods right into their mouth. And this wasn't very acceptable, and they just rehydrated them with ambient water. And they didn't really like these foods, and a lot of them would come back on the missions.